Good evening, everyone. We will get started on the public planning meeting for the method of distribution for CDBG Regional Mitigation Funds for the Houston-Galveston region in just a few minutes. But first, we'll go over a few housekeeping items. Interpreters are available for tonight's meeting. ASL or American Sign Language interpreters will be on camera and interpreting throughout the meeting, and Spanish and Vietnamese and Mandarin interpreters are also available throughout the meeting. If you need to access one of the spoken language interpreters, click on the interpretation button and choose a language on the toolbar on your computer. On your mobile phone or device, click on the three dots on the bottom of the screen and choose Language Interpretation from the menu. I now invite the interpreters to introduce themselves. Maddie?
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a sign language interpreter.
Amanda, I think.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm a sign language interpreter.
Thank you. Patricia?
Good evening. My name is Patricia. I'm a Spanish language interpreter.
Cook Win? Helen?
My name is Helen Wall. Hi, I'm Chinese interpreter.
All right, thank you. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and we ask that you keep your microphones muted during the presentation. You will have a chance to unmute to ask questions or make public comments during those portions of the meeting. Mute and unmute buttons on your computer are on the left side of your toolbar. If you're on your phone, you can dial *6 to mute and unmute. An automatic closed captioning is enabled. Click on the live transcript button to turn it on or off on your computer. If you're on a mobile device, you will find your mute and unmute button on the bottom of the screen, and you can enable or disable closed captioning by clicking on the three dots on the bottom of your screen and choosing Full View Transcript on the menu. Thank you. We will now begin the meeting.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Table, and I am the Director of Community and Environmental Planning at the Houston-Galveston Area Council, and I will be leading our discussion today. And we're very happy you could join us this evening to participate in this public planning meeting on the Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Funds. As you can see on the agenda, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the process for developing the method of distribution, and we'll be discussing development of mitigation projects to lessen the impacts from future disasters in a number of different areas that are outlined in our agenda tonight. After I complete my presentation, we will have a question and answer period where you can ask me questions about anything that we've covered in the presentation, and I or my staff will provide you answers if we are able. After the question and answer session, we will go into a public comment session, and I just want to stress that those two things are different. So this being a somewhat less formal public planning meeting, we'll have an opportunity to engage, get your questions answered, but then when we go into public comment, we will not be able to respond to your comments in real time. We will, however, record them and present the comment and our response to our board of directors and its Water Resources Committee, which is assisting us in advising the board in developing the method of distribution. Next slide, please. So I recognize that some of you may not know what the Houston-Galveston Area Council, or H-GAC, as we like to call it, is. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, and our relationship with our partner on this project, the Texas General Land Office. So H-GAC is a regional council of governments that encompasses 13 counties and 34 cities. Our service area is in this light gray on the map, so we include Houston and Harris County, as well as 12 counties in the surrounding area. We are governed by a board of directors that is entirely comprised of local elected officials from the 13 counties. We also have representatives from all the cities in the region that are over 25,000 in population, as well as representatives from smaller home rule and general law cities, as well as independent school districts. As I mentioned before, we have a subcommittee of our board of directors that has been helping us review some of the options we have at our disposal for developing a method of distribution for federal community development block grant mitigation funds in this region. And that is why we introduced the GLO and the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department into this discussion. How it works is the funds come from the federal government to the state of Texas. The General Land Office is the entity required for developing an action plan that tells the federal government how these funds are to be distributed within the state. The GLO has given regional councils such as H-GAC the responsibility for developing methods of distribution to allocate these funds to local cities and counties and other eligible entities. This is funding for those jurisdictions, not for individual projects. So the method of distribution will be an allocation formula that goes to local governments in the areas shown on this map. We believe that this is a very good approach because different regions in Texas have different needs. And we have a unique regional focus of the mitigation needs of communities in this broader region that's supplied both by their elected official leaders and the constituents that they serve. So the General Land Office provides us considerable flexibility in tailoring the method of distribution to address these needs, so long as it complies with their and the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development's guidelines. I'll also add that H-GAC has substantial experience in developing methods of distribution. This will be the fourth one that we have developed. We developed two for Hurricane Ike funding, and we also developed one in 2018 for the first round of federal funding from the Harvey disaster recovery funds. Next slide, please. So I want to tell you a little bit about the process of how we get from where we are today to a final method of distribution, and finally that money getting out to the cities and counties and others who need it. So we have begun the process with the General Land Office by the development of our citizen participation plan. This meeting and the ones we held earlier today are the first opportunities we've had a chance to meet with the public, explain the MOD process, and allow them to give us some feedback that can inform our development of this method of distribution. After we hear from you tonight and tomorrow, more on that in a minute, we will create a preliminary method of distribution that the GLO will either conditionally approve or tell us of any necessary revisions, and ultimately and only once that has been conditionally approved will we be permitted to seek public comments on the actual formula. So again, the steps are our board will approve the submittal of a preliminary draft that will have to be approved by the General Land Office, and any necessary amendments or revisions will be made. At that time, we will have a lengthier public review process that will involve a comment period. You'll get to see the exact formula that we are proposing. And we will also at that time send an acknowledgement letter to all the jurisdictions. By that, I mean cities and counties and other eligible entities who would be receiving funding under this formula, to verify that they indeed are able to use those funds. We'll also hold our public hearing at that time and update the method of distribution based on any comments that we received from the public then and update the method and send it to the General Land Office for the final approval. Once that has been finally approved, then we'll notify all the jurisdictions, cities, counties, and other eligible entities of their award under the method of distribution. Under our guidelines from the General Land Office, this process is to take 6 months. So given the schedule we have, it's a rather tight timetable. I'll give you some more information on key milestones in that later in my presentation. But let's go to the next slide first. So as I mentioned before, the General Land Office is required to submit a state action plan to the federal government to approve how they intend to distribute these funds. This state action plan will govern how H-GAC determines its allocation. And this original plan was submitted back in 2019. In August of last year, the General Land Office had an amendment proposal to HUD, and there were some substantial revisions to that plan in this amendment. And I need to note that this amendment that we're working under the guidelines of is still pending approval from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. The guidance we have received from the Andrea on my staff has just sent you all links. So if you're interested in getting into depth on what the proposed HUD rules governing this, GLO rules governing this program are, you can go to that link and explore this document. As I said, it has not yet been approved, but the GLO has been working to supply the additional information that the HUD has requested. So we're hoping that this will be approved in the near term. Next slide, please. So one thing that is important to note that did change in this amendment is in the original state action plan, the amount that the Houston-Galveston Area Council would be allocated for this process was $209,410,000. In the state action plan, a second round of a statewide Hurricane Harvey competition that was meant to look at larger scale projects was removed, and that funding was reallocated to regional councils, including H-GAC, and a direct allocation was also provided to Harris County of $750 million. I'll also add that Harris County is required to develop its own method of distribution for how it intends to use those funds, and will also have to go through a public review process similar to what we are doing. Next slide, please. So the eligible entities that are listed in the amendment are cities, counties, and councils of government. We may also seek a waiver to permit allocations to other governmental jurisdictions or entities such as municipal utility districts, river authorities, ports, and others. At this time, we are not planning to submit a waiver. The main reason being that there are hundreds of those other units of special purpose governments in the region, and developing a formula to allocate among all of those, as well as the 13 counties and 134 cities, would be a very difficult task. But I will note that cities and counties may indeed work with those other governmental entities on projects with their allocation. So the region in this map has been divided into two categories. The first is the orange color that you see on a number of the counties, as well as these blue zip codes that have been identified in some of those lighter shaded counties. that is what is called the HUD most impacted counties and zip codes. And we're required to allocate at least 50% of the funds in our method of distribution within those areas. And up to 50% of the funds may address identified risks in these lighter yellow shaded counties. And I'll tell you now that I think we'll be vastly over 50% in these orange and zip code areas in some of the early analysis that has been done. Next slide, please. So the eligible activities available are fairly broad. Again, I want to stress that these are mitigation funds, the prior methods of distribution we've done were for disaster recovery. So these funds are to provide longer term mitigation and resiliency. They do not need to be specifically related to damage to something that happened in Hurricane Harvey. Regional councils are able to prioritize or remove items from this list, but at this time, recognizing the wide range of communities and their needs, we are proposing just to make the entire list of eligible activities eligible within our method of distribution. Next slide, please. So there are also a list of ineligible activities, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see the types of categories of projects that are not eligible under this fund. Another thing that is not on this list, but is stated elsewhere in the state action plan, is that planning studies and feasibility analysis and those types of things must be part of an existing implementation project. We can't fund studies that will recommend projects or look at feasibility. It has to be tied to actual implementation of one of those eligible activities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, in looking at the mitigation needs for the region, the funding does not need to be tied to damages from Hurricane Harvey. Can be used to mitigate risks of potential future disasters. And of course, as we all know who've been here for a while, our region is low-lying, it's flat, it's traversed by thousands of miles of waterways, and so we're certainly vulnerable to flooding from storm events. And the type of activities that we want to make this mod reflective of include increased resilience to flooding, storm surge, impacts of erosion on some of those major water bodies, whether they be rivers or bayous, and then making sure that we can ensure utility operations. But we're certainly interested in hearing from you if there are other major mitigation needs that we should be considering in the development of this method of distribution. Next slide, please. So again, let me stress, this is not a grant program where we're looking at specific projects. This is going to be, as we have now conceived it, allocations to cities, counties, possibly to the Council of Governments, H-GAC, and they will be responsible for identifying projects that will meet the General Land Office criteria. So we are not involved in selecting projects individually. The GLO requires us to have a formula, basically, that is an indicator of those mitigation needs. They want to make sure that it's an allocation technique that's based on objective, replicable, and verifiable data that accounts for vulnerable populations and potential impacts from future disasters. H-GAC has had similar guiding principles in its 3 previous methods of distribution and will continue to do so in this one. We want to make sure, that it is all publicly available data that reflects the entire region, Further add that we are really committed to having a straightforward allocation formula. I'll note that some of the General Land Office allowable factors include something called an index, where there may be a bunch of different categories that are rolled into a number or some sort of a score that a jurisdiction, city or county would get. We believe that the formula ought to be simple enough for people to check our math. And when we do indeed put the draft method distribution out, we will illustrate specifically how each of the factors that we select impact each community and relate to the allocation they will be receiving. Next slide, please. So we have been looking to that end at 4 potential objective factors, and I'm going to briefly describe these. We have the data of those who have requested FEMA individual assistance in all of the named disasters going back to 2002 through 2019. Now, some may question, why aren't we just using the data for Hurricane Harvey? And our rationale for proposing these factors are, since this funding is to be used for mitigation purposes, we want to look at a broader sample. Even though Harvey was certainly the storm of record for this region, there were other storms and events of different types that affected different parts of the region in different ways. So we wanted to get a little bit broader sample of how disasters, particularly flooding and storm surge, have impacted the region. Hence, we're proposing to go with this longer view. Within that, there's 2 categories that we're looking at. First of all, is just the number of households applying for assistance. How many people were impacted overall? Secondly, we're going to look at the amount of real property damage, that's your house and associated facilities, as well as personal property damages of your individual personal property. And the reason we think it's important to look at both of these factors is they really fill out the picture a little bit better. There may be communities that have large numbers of people applying for assistance, but maybe the damage was relatively minor. We may have some areas that have had really high property damage, but that's because the houses are more expensive and there's more damage the bigger the house. So we want to be fair and equitable in terms of the severity of the damage, but also not have that totally pinned on just the places with the higher dollar amounts getting a larger share of this allocation. Next factor we're proposing to include in our formula is the number of low to moderate individuals. These are people defined as earning less than 80% of the area median income. And then finally, we're going to look at population within the floodway, the 100-year, and the 500-year floodplain. So we see this as really an indicator of not only existing, but potential future mitigation needs. So even if the storms in our database didn't particularly affect an area, we all know that the patterns within a region that is 12,500 square miles can be quite different. So if there's still populations within these various floodplain delineations, we view that as a mitigation risk. We also have the ability to set appropriate weights for each of these factors. So we may just say they all have the same weight, or we may say some of them ought to weigh more than others, and be interested in hearing if you have any comments either on these factors or on how we should weight them, or any additional factors you think we should consider. Next slide, please. So as far as the proposed funding options, I want to go over these in some detail. So first of all, the General Land Office has set a minimum allocation for jurisdictions of $1 million. So what this would mean is that any cities that have less than $1 million through our formula, that amount would roll up to the county where that city is. And the counties can certainly use that fund to do projects in their cities. But the rationale of this is particularly with flood mitigation projects, those below $1 million may not really have the type of measurable impact. And so I think we are not at this time planning to seek a waiver unless maybe there are some communities that are perhaps just below that $1 million amount. We are also permitted to set base allocation amounts for both the HUD and the state most impacted counties. We think this is a good idea because some of those areas themselves may not have a critical mass to do meaningful mitigation projects, particularly true in counties that have a lot of area to cover and perhaps not enough to really do a meaningful project that would address their needs at a countywide scale. I mentioned earlier the Harris County is going to be receiving $750 million to allocate through its method of distribution. So we are at this time not considering a direct share of this regional funding for the unincorporated areas of Harris County. Again, they are receiving considerably more than we are for the other 12 counties in the region with $750 million. We have not yet determined how we will allocate funding for the cities within Harris County in our formula, and would be interested in your comments on that if you have any. We are also considering establishing a specific allocation to H-GAC for regional and urgent need projects. I want to make clear this would be funding not that stays at H-GAC, but then we would pass through to projects that either were larger, multi-jurisdictional in nature, or specific urgent needs, perhaps for smaller jurisdictions that would not get a direct allocation or be able to solve some of their urgent mitigation issues with the funds received through our formula. And we think this is worthwhile to explore because, as I mentioned before, a lot of communities were anticipating there was going to be a second round of the larger statewide mitigation competition. That is not going to be the case. And so we feel like this would provide us some flexibility to address these projects that are either at a larger scale or an urgent need that is kind of putting an entire community at risk. Final thing is the current requirement of the General Land Office is that we must provide a low to moderate income benefit in the funding we allocate of 50%. And I'm going to take a minute to explain that a little bit further because it's a bit complicated, at least it is to me, but I will go through it slowly and hopefully it will be clear. You can certainly ask questions about it when I get done. So this 50% pertains to the projects that are funded. So to give you an example, if a city got $1 million through our allocation formula, it would have to use at least 50% of that money on projects that benefit 51% low to moderate income residents. So again, the 51% is, if you will, a pass-fail. You either get it or you don't. And 50% is the dollar amount of your projects that have to be spent to meet that criteria. We are planning to propose a waiver to lower that 50%, and that's about the money, that's not about the population served, to our region's average of 44%. And the reason why we are proposing this is particularly for some of those larger mitigation projects, or really any project that works on a watershed-wide scale, it can be hard to find an entire watershed area that benefits greater than 51% low to moderate income population. As a result, there may be such a project that would in fact benefit significant numbers of low to moderate income people that would not qualify for that pass-fail amount. So we think the moving that down to the regional average of 44% might be a reasonable request to provide that kind of flexibility, and will help more people, both low to moderate income and others in the region. Next slide, please. So here is the milestones that we have, here are the milestones that we have laid out. And I, of course, underline that this schedule is subject to change. But again, given the fact that we need to complete our work before June, and that we have some long lead times as far as the General Land Office review, we are planning to take what we hear from the meetings we've held today and any comments you submit tomorrow to our Board Water Resources Committee, who will meet to consider them on February 9th. And that committee, if they're able to reach consensus on a recommendation, would make a recommendation to our Board of Directors, which will meet on February 15th. If all that goes on schedule, we will submit at the board's blessing, a preliminary method of distribution to the General Land Office. They have told us that it could take up to 2 months to review and approve that preliminary mod for public comment and public hearing. The reason for these dates being different is the 26th would be the earliest date we could open that, because we've got some legal notice posting requirements. We would have a public comment period and then possibly adopt a final mod in May. That would be the fastest we could possibly do that. So I will mention that that schedule is subject to change. Next slide, please. So I do want to just let you know about opportunities to be engaged in those early meetings. So the Board of Directors Water Resources Committee meeting will be February 9th at 2 p.m. This will be a virtual meeting. As an advisory committee to the HGAC board, it is not subject to open meetings requirements, but we do permit guests to join us and listen in. So if you are interested in attending either that meeting to hear the discussion, or to participate in our February 15th Board of Directors meeting, which will be a hybrid meeting including both in-person and virtual participation options, you may do that. And at the Board of Directors meeting, we do have a opportunity for the public to issue comments. If you're interested in more information on how to attend either of those meetings, please use the email that is provided on this slide. And for those of you joining us on the phone, Andrea is also sending it out. It is public comments at H-GAC.com. Next slide, please. So now we will move into our question and answer session. And again, I want to make clear that this is a time for us to answer your questions. If you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand using the hand raise function and we'll call on you. If you're on your phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. And just so we can make sure we know where you're coming from, we ask that you state your name and place of residence, that you tell us if you are here as an authorized spokesperson for any organization, and to make sure that we have enough time to get all of our questions answered. We're asking that the combined time of your question and our response not exceed 5 minutes. So we will let you know when we are running close to time on that. And as I will just state that since we've had a couple meetings today, if we get through the whole first round and you have thought of another question since then, we can certainly come back to you. But during this period, we ask that you not make comments. This is really a time for questions and answers. When we've concluded that portion of the meeting, then we will go into a public comment process. And I'll give you more details on that. But I want to make sure that the first part is questions and answers. When we get into public comments, we'll let you give your comment, but we won't respond in real time at this meeting. So with that, I'm happy to take the first question.
Okay, Jeff, our first question is from Madison Sloan.
Hello, Madison.
Hello, I'm Madison Sloan. I'm the Director of Disaster Recovery and Fair Housing at Texas Appleseed. I have a couple of questions, but we'll start with one. How will the Houston-Galveston Area Council determine the set aside for regional and urgent need projects, and what qualifies as an urgent need project? I'm sorry.
Well, we have been maintaining a list of priority flood mitigation projects for some time. That is not necessarily specific to the method of distribution, but it has given us an idea of what some of the both regional mitigation projects and potential urgent need projects are out there. So we have looked at some of the ones that are on that list and whether they might be eligible for the method of distribution. So I think that has been a starting place for how we would calibrate setting that amount. I need to note, however, that the mod we submit does not commit us to any of those projects. So we can consider continue to consider new projects, and those projects would not be nailed down, if you will, until it is time for us to certify those projects we intend to pursue. What qualifies as an urgent need project is basically that it has a dire consequence. So perhaps a community would be without a wastewater supply if their lone plant went out of commission, that it has a community-wide impact. So we recognize that there are projects that might be an urgent need at a neighborhood or smaller level, but we're really looking at ones where it's kind of an existential threat to an entire community, and ones for which there is really no viable alternative. So, some projects may be have another way out that wouldn't necessarily put the whole community in peril. So we have considered a number of those on our list and are willing to take other nominations of those as we go forward.
Thank you.
Jeff, I'd invite Naomi Osfeld to make our next question.
Hi, Jeff. My name is Naomi Ostfeld. I live in Houston, Harris County, not too far from Brays Bayou. So I'm sure you can guess where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
Someone had told me that we could give information with respect to a specific project on the $750 million for Harris County. And from what you're saying, no, that's not correct, at least not in this meeting. Do you have information as to who we can contact regarding a specific project for Harris County? And that's $750 million.
I do not have that information, Ms. Ostfeld. I have not heard any information about the Harris County method of distribution process or how to provide information to it.
Yeah, well, someone had said that they had that you had that information, even gave us a telephone number to call, but from what I'm hearing from you is very different. And in fact, this is just general information and don't talk about a specific project.
Well,
Correct?
you may talk about a specific project in the comment period. So
Okay.
we're still in questions and answers, and we're certainly interested in hearing about any project needs in the region, but I don't have information on a contact person for Harris County. I might suggest that Harris County Flood Control could be a good place to ask, but I'm not sure that they are taking the lead in developing.
No, they're well aware of the need. They just don't have the funding for it right now.
I see.
So I will make a comment then and later on. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Jeff, we don't currently have anyone else raising their hands or indicating in the chat that they want to ask a question. So I will put that out to everyone. As Jeff said, if you do have a question you'd like to ask before we go into comments, please just indicate by raising your hand or writing us a note in the chat and we will call on you. Okay, Jeff, our next question is from Madison Sloan.
Hello again. How are you going to deal with jurisdictions who got awards from the statewide competition in round one? Will they be eligible for a second award, or will you prioritize jurisdictions that haven't gotten funding yet?
We don't have right now a factor to in any way eliminate the funding allocation from those jurisdictions that have received round one awards.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, again, we don't have anyone currently indicating that they have a question in either with a hand raised or in the chat. So we'll put that out last call for questions before we move on to our comment section. Okay, Jeff, I see no questions in either the hand raise or the chat. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Next slide, please. So I'll just note that if people have a question after we've concluded the public comments that you'd still like to get addressed, we may certainly do that. But now we are going to shift gears and ask once again with the Zoom function of raising your hand or the *9 on the phone to give us your comments. So state your name and place of residence. Tell us if you were here as an authorized spokesperson for any organization, and please limit your comment time to 3 minutes. And I will mention that we are not able to respond to your comments in this forum, but we will record them all and prepare a response, and we will share that with our board of directors and Water Resources Committee. So ready to hear the first comment.
Jeff, our first comment comes from Naomi Osfeld.
Thank you.
Yeah, big surprise that I was going to have my comment here. Harris County Flood Control District, during their Keegan's Bayou Flood Mitigation Project, said that they need 350 acres at 10 feet deep in detention ponds to completely stop the flooding. Rufino Hills Detention Pond would provide 135 acres at 10 feet deep, which is more than a third of that total space. The problem was because the flood control district only had $30 million on the Keegan's Bayou project at this stage, that it was insufficient funds to be able to do a Rufino Hills Detention Pond. However, like I said, it would be a major factor. And funding for the Rufino Hills Detention Pond would basically give maximum bang for the buck for two reasons. One, it would substantially reduce flooding along Keegan's Bayou, and Keegan's Bayou does have a lot of lower to moderate income families and businesses. And according to the flood control district, everything that happens upstream has a direct effect upon what happens downstream on Brays Bayou. So consequently, the idea of having 135 acres, 10 feet deep of detention pond would substantially reduce the stress for flooding lower down on Brays Bayou. And even though a tremendous amount of work is being done on Brays Bayou, every gallon has to be accounted for, because letting 1 gallon more upstream, that has a direct impact upon what happens downstream on Brays Bayou, according to the flood control district. So consequently, this could be a major stress reliever if Rufino's Hills Detention Pond could be funded. Thank you.
Jeff, our next comment comes from Mr. Stephen Costello.
Thank you and good evening, Jeff. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very informative. For the audience, my name is Stephen Costello. I'm the Chief Recovery Officer for the City of Houston. What I would like to do is just to comment on the rating or ranking system that you had briefly went over, and what the position that the city believes we should be taking. First of all, the funds that came to the state through HUD, which is a $4.3 billion, GLO's initial state action plan segregated the money into basically 3 pots, which was her disaster 2015, disaster 2016, and then the Harvey competition. And so one of your ranking systems, your weighting systems, is going back to as far back as 2002. We think that is contrary to the intent of the legislation at first. If anything, I would limit it to 2015 to 2019. That's my personal opinion. Secondly, what I think is problematic is that there is an overemphasis on what we would call regional flooding and lack of emphasis on what I would call urban flooding. A lot of the people that in the city that flooded actually flooded because of the infrastructure is inadequate to deliver the water to the streams. So that is a major concern that we have in what we would call the project selection. The third item that I would like to address is we don't agree with a waiver of reducing the 50% threshold for servicing low to moderate income areas. And I think what happens is that you'll find that most of the major metropolitan areas is where we have a significant population of low to moderate income areas. And we think that the metropolitan areas would suffer from a reduction of investment in those communities. In fact, when we submitted projects to the GLO in the first round of competition, we submitted over $500 million in projects that were all 100% LMI projects. So we believe that we would suffer from that particular aspect of it. And then lastly, what I would like to say is that I believe that the timeline is rushed a little bit, only because of the fact that the staff has taken the position that the $750 million that the county is doing is going to show that the unincorporated areas are getting those funding, and then there won't be any money coming from the method of distribution from the local COG. What I would rather see is that we wait to see what the county's method of distribution is first before the COG decides to make the decisions on funding allocation as well. So those are my salient points. I do appreciate everything that the staff does. And for the audience to know, I've known Jeff for a very, very long time. He's about ready to retire. He spent a long time at H-GAC, and we at the city really appreciate all the work that his staff and the people at H-GAC do. Thank you for the opportunity to make my comments.
Thank you.
Jeff, we have a couple of comments that were made in the chat.
Yes.
I would invite Christina Flores. You are free to state your comment, or I'd be happy to read it from the chat, whichever you prefer. Not hearing from you, I'm going to go ahead and read that. It says, hello, Christina Flores, City of Kendleton. First, the HGAC mod should not include Harris County or incorporated jurisdictions within Harris County. The primary reason for not including these jurisdictions is that Harris County will receive $750 million for the development of a mod specific to Harris County. Including these jurisdictions in both mods represents an unfair advantage within the region that the other 12 counties are not afforded. Jurisdictions should be in one mod or the other, but should not be considered for both. This is especially true for the city of Houston. The first mod set precedent by not including Harris County and communities within, so HGAC should continue this practice. And there's a continuation of her comment. The second flaw exhibited within the presented mod is the HGAC set aside in the amount of 60 million. We do not believe that establishing set aside allocations for special projects is in line with the intent of the CDBG MIT program. Moreover, it appears that HGAC is considering a collection of projects which will not meet the CDBG MIT LMI requirements of allocating 51% to LMI eligible projects. These funds allocated as an HGAC set aside would be better served within the region if they were redistributed based on the weighted formulas. And she apologized, she's having connection issues. And there was a comment just echoing her insights from Dietrich von Biedenfeld. I echo Christina Flores' insights, Dietrich von Biedenfeld, Mayor Pro Tem, HGAC Delegate, City of West Columbia.
And you even said my name right. I'm quite impressed.
I did my homework. We do have another comment from Madison Sloan.
Thank you. Again, I'm Madison Sloan with Texas Appleseed. I'd like to just preface my comments by saying this comment period is, I think, completely unreasonable. You're presenting this to the public and you're asking us for comments in less than 24 hours. I don't think that's long enough, and I think you should extend it. I'm also a little concerned by how fast the process is going. You're presenting this information and you're essentially saying you're going to develop this entire method of distribution and have it approved in a week, I guess 10 days if you count weekends. At this point, the action plan amendment hasn't even been approved. I'm not clear on why this has to go so fast and in a way that I think really excludes the public from making meaningful public comment. I do think I have some further questions, about some of the factors and the methods. I think, just a couple of points. One, if you're not telling us how you're weighting the factors, you're essentially not telling us anything about, the mod. The weighting is what actually is going to determine the allocations. It's really, that weight is important, and I understand that you're asking for comment on it. The FEMA data, again, it's unclear why those specific years were chosen. The FEMA data is flawed. The FEMA data particularly undercounts damages to renters and low-income homeowners. So those people are underrepresented in that data. FEMA applications themselves are often lower, particularly from small rural areas. So the FEMA data need to be adjusted to take into account the underrepresentation, particularly of renters and of low and moderate income areas. We appreciate that HGAC is looking at where people are in the floodplain and where they are in the floodway. Those FEMA maps are sometimes quite out of date. We'd ask you to look at, compare that to some of the actual flooding that happened in Hurricane Harvey, and figure out are those floodplain maps accurate, and is that where damage is going? The impact of development is also something that should be taken into account. We'd also oppose a waiver of the low and moderate income requirement. That's the requirements in federal law. 50% is already lower, is already a waiver of the 70% LMI requirement in the CDBG law.
Ms. Sloan, I apologize.
Oh,
You're reaching
sorry,
the
I'm
end of
going
your
over.
time. Just
Yeah.
you could wrap up.
I will wrap up. I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and the public just needs more time to understand what's happening and to comment than 24 hours. Thank you.
Jeff, we've had additional comments in the chat. One additional comment from Christina Flores, who was commenting previously. I'll read this for her. The third and final flaw pertains to the FEMA disaster data considered for household, personal, and real property damage from 2002 to 2019. The federal CDBG MIT allocation is based on disaster events that occurred in 2015, 2016, and 2017 Harvey. The specific allocation of funds to regions for the development of mods is not only associated to the Hurricane Harvey impacting is only associated to the Hurricane Harvey impacted region. Including data from disaster events that are more than 15 years prior to the events leading to the CDBG MIT allocation is unfounded. Weighted data included in the H-GAC mod should only include the associated impacts from the 3 disaster events years, with the premium placed on the impact of Hurricane Harvey. And there was a comment from Elaine Morales. I echo Maddie's comment. Many of us in the community learned about this meeting today, and there were some additional comments regarding learning about the meeting today. There are no other indications of anyone with a comment with their hand raised or in the chat. So I'll ask if anyone does have a comment, please indicate so we can call on you or read your question for you. Jeff, I still have no one indicating in either place, so I'll turn this back over to you.
All right, well, thank you. See a note from Megan Coughlin here. Any other questions that we didn't get to or that you thought of since we opened the comment period? Well, in that case, I would like to reiterate that we are still accepting written and oral comments until 5 p.m. tomorrow. And you may make these comments either by email. And for those of you on the phone, that address is public-comments@h-gac.com. Or you may leave it as a voicemail at 1-855-363-2516. And I'll close by saying I greatly appreciate your spending time this evening that could be devoted to family and other pursuits, but your comments are important to us and we appreciate your participating in this public engagement. And we will let you know of the next opportunity to comment, at which time there will be an extended period, and we are enjoined, of course, until the GLO has approved a draft from talking about any specific numbers, but you will have a chance to see all that once the preliminary mod has been prepared and available for approval. So thank you again for your participation, and we will go ahead and close the meeting.